Hello, my name is Charles, and today we have an interesting video. Today's video will be on the neuroscience of learning. I will teach you the science in terms of the mechanisms and science in a simple way of how we learn, 6 ways to improve your ability to learn neuroscientifically, and to dispel the common myth that you can't learn as you get older. A full bibliography with all the scientific research and evidence will be in the description below, and a helpful free schedule that you can use that will help you schedule and plan your day for optimized learning will be put in the description below. So the first definition to get across is what's known as neuroplasticity. So, and this has a couple categories, but broadly speaking, neuroplasticity means the ability for the brain to form new connections and learn new things, adapt to the environment and learn new things. One is what's known as synaptic plasticity. So this is strengthening or weakening of connections, and it's categorized in 2 different ways. So the first one, which is strengthening connection, there's actually a term for this that I have in my notes. It is known as long-term potentiation. So if you imagine your synapses between, brain cells, between neurons, as like a highway, right? And it's like a communication highway that your brain uses to communicate and allows you to think, feel, act, do all the stuff you need to do. Long-term potentiation is basically like, I always, it's reinforcing and strengthening certain pathways. And so let's say every time you press or every time you go to the supermarket, you get food. Your brain will strengthen, the pathway for supermarket equals food, because every time you go there, you get food, and that is like strengthening it. So what you use will be strengthened, and what you don't use, it's called long-term depression. And it's not like, I'm depressed and it's chronic, it's long-term. No, it's in the synaptic connection. If you, let's say, don't use, or you've been poorly sleeping, like you don't use like a certain math formula, and now you're 25 years old and you haven't used this trigonometry formula, SOHCAHTOA, in so long, you forget how to do it. You forget how to do the math thing. That's because your brain's like, all right, we don't use that. Let's start cutting off that communication pathway. The next is what's known as neurogenesis. And this is part of neuroplasticity, and it's production of new neurons. Now, majority of the new neurons are produced, as you're growing up. But this is to dispel the myth. There is research that shows not only do you still form new neurons or connections as you get older, there was a study that I found that a lifelong intellectual stimulation correlated with, or like essentially fights against like dementia and Alzheimer's and those things, and it keeps your mind working. So when people, that's why there's this common age-old thing, like someone retires and then they just, they have nothing to do all day and they don't have like a purpose, and they end up just, not being as sharp, not being as on it, and being depressed, because like you got to use your brain to keep your brain, or else you lose your brain. So next is axonal sprouting. So this is for those who worry about like, oh my gosh, I got an injury, I'm going to lose all my brain cells. If you get an injury, sometimes neurons form new connections or sprout out new branches to make up lost connections in an injury. So it's like your brain is, we've evolved and been designed by God so perfectly and so beautifully. So even if, you have an injury, it does not mean you're going to lose all your brain cells or lose your intelligence. You'll be okay. It's a pretty robust, healthy system. This isn't to say that getting a bunch of concussions and bashing your brain against a wall is good, and that you're not going to experience brain damage, but in slight, ways, it won't be too bad. Or in circumstances that are not so severe, it won't be too bad. I gotta clarify. So, yeah, we definitely want to get, so this is kind of like how it works, right? Now, for example, now I promised not only, right, this is like to show that like, okay, we can lifelong learn. There is learning and there's mechanisms that develop this. And one of the mechanisms is that is like REM sleep. So one of the ways we learn or consolidate memory is like REM sleep selectively prunes and maintains new synapses and development and learning. This means like sleep is essential for learning, but it's like sleep is like where you get almost a mental shower. Your brain will emotionally process, and it'll also consolidate memories to different brain regions like the hippocampus and others. And so it is super important, right, even from a neurological lens, that you get REM sleep. And so there you might have what's it called? Yeah. So to go further in depth to, the neuroplasticity and the science of learning, as I promised, with synaptic plasticity, you can imagine it like trailheads, where it's like if you've walked a certain trailhead so many times, it gets more and more defined. So what you do consistently gets defined. And the neurotransmitter involved in what we call long-term potentiation most of the time is what's called glutamate. And it's an excitatory neurotransmitter, and it's associated with learning and memory. And then long-term depression is like the weakening of certain neural pathways. So let's say you don't use the math skill, and stuff like that. And so the more you engage in a behavior, the more you repeat it, there's a persistent increase in that synaptic strength. So neurons that fire together wire together. So if you repeat a behavior consistently, it'll continue that. So one thing that's interesting with this, right, understanding now that we know the science, like why is this important? Well, it's the foundation of learning, and we can optimize it to enhance our learning and happiness throughout life. So one thing is like rehearsing new memories. In my steps, like one of the steps that I will teach you for how to improve your ability to learn is about novelty and repetition. And so part of this is rehearsing new memories. When you learn, let's say, a new word, for example, let's say you learn a new word that day, try to use it as many times as possible, because then you'll be able to consolidate it into long-term memory and have it at your repertoire to have a greater vernacular and vocabulary when communicating with other people. And then like some, new research is coming out where they're trying to see if there's drugs or medicine that can be used to erase or treat pathological synaptic states. So, right, what are synapses again? Synapses are like the bridges between neurons. They're like the communication highways. And so pathological states or synaptic states, they're like broken bridges between brain cells, and they cause, crashes which affect the way you think and feel. So if they could have a drug, for example, that were able to cause long-term depression in these pathological synaptic states, then they could help things like epilepsy, Alzheimer's, and autism. So that would be super, super awesome. In a way, they might even be able to do like a forgetting pill. I mean, if you think about it, right? Now, this is if you're a materialist. I don't necessarily agree with this, but potentially, if you imagine, if your memories are localized in a certain area in the brain, and you could take a pill to cause those brain synaptic pathways to be cut off, then you could almost selectively forget things that cause pain. I don't know. All right, but now we are going to get into what I promised. So what are the best ways to improve learning and the science around them? So one is exercise regularly. So this prevents neuronal loss in the hippocampus, which is associated with memory. It actually helps in new neurons being created, And also exercise gives you brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which is involved in like learning or associated with learning and is super, super good. So exercise helps learning. Take care of your body. And the second one, which might be surprising, is play improves neuroplasticity. So if you're able to be playful throughout the day, play games, video games, or even in conversation, have a playful and joyous spirit, it does actually improve neuroplasticity. And I think it's because it increases the range of associations you can make. And if you have a higher range of associations when you're being playful and you're cracking jokes with people and you're making people laugh, then naturally new connections form. And third is quality and lots of rest, so lots of good sleep, right? Dendrite growth will happen, and those dendrites help transmit info in the brain. So sleep is absolutely essential. We know sleep is like the brain shower, right? Process those emotions, consolidate the memories, just be functioning better. We know sleep, super, super important. And then 4 is enrichment. So there are studies that show that intellectual stimulation in adults fights against age-related problems and cognitive decline. So keep yourself learning always, Then learning a new skill or language, and preferably when you learn a new skill, if it involves both the body and the mind, that is the best, like dancing or some maybe painting thing, or piano even, because when you engage in both, it creates more connections and requires different parts of the brains to talk to each other. Then also travel. I mean, if you imagine when you travel somewhere and see something absolutely new and breathtaking, you not only get new social engagements, you get new sights and sounds and smells, and your brain just gets this huge shot of like, oh my gosh, so much novelty, so much newness, like this is so fascinating, and you're going to make new connections. Also creating art, creative works are going to improve neuroplasticity. And then 5, right, most important, what we all live for is healthy social interaction. I mean, these are obvious reasons, right? We learn and form like intimate bonds. Most people's connections with others form their sense of deep meaning, whether it be, connections with your devoted partner or your family or your friends, or even like God, like the relationships are all what it's about in love. Like ultimately, that's what we're all here for. And then last is novelty and repetition. So when we experience that novelty, we're going to be able to form new connections. That's going to be the neurogenesis and strengthening of new connections, right? That long-term potentiation and that synaptic increase, but for new connections. And then we want to practice those skills to consolidate them into long-term memory. So those are the 6 steps. Lifelong learning is totally possible. It's scientifically proven. So in today's video, we showed, right, some of the basics of and explained some of the definitions for the basic science and mechanisms for learning. We explained 6 ways to improve your ability to learn. And we dispelled the common myth that you can't learn as you get older. Remember, a full bibliography with all the scientific research is available down below in the description, and so too a schedule to live on a healthy learning routine. Much love. Have a blessed day.